Let's take a look at the Tom Collins, a foundational drink, ancient drink, one you gotta know. Let's look at the history of the drink and then how we might elaborate on it, advance it, dress it up, make it elevated a bit. Okay. All right, let's do that now on HT. I haven't touched the Tom Collins on this show since it started way back in 2015, and that's a mistake because this is a dead simple drink to make. It is foundational, it's a crowd pleaser, and you should know how to make it. It's also my wife's favorite drink. In fact, this and daiquiris are the only two drinks she will let me make for her, which fate would work out like that, right? Yeah, I think that makes sense. Anyway, let me build a Tom Collins as I like to build it, and then how you can elevate this drink and expand upon it, okay? I'm gonna build this drink in the glass. Now, when I set out to shoot this episode, I intended to use a nice, crisp Collins spear like I would normally on YouTube. But I found out I've only got 3 of those left, which is just enough for the one I'm gonna use later in this episode. So this one's gonna get built on crushed ice, or cracked ice, which is honestly, actually how I build these more often than not when it's just for me and my wife. Now I'm gonna add half an ounce of simple syrup. This simple syrup is a little bit darker in color because it is a organic cane sugar that I used, and that's a 2-to-1 ratio. I build all my syrups at 2-to-1 ratio if it's at all possible. I really don't see the benefit in making a 1-to-1 syrup. If you think things are too sweet, you can always cut it back, and a 2-to-1 syrup is shelf stable, doesn't need refrigeration. So that's the way I do it. Now I will take a lemon and I will cut the lemon in half, and I want 1 ounce of lemon juice. Generally speaking, there's a little more than 2 ounces of lemon juice in a lemon, so 1/2 of a lemon should work out right. If you don't even want to measure, just do half a lemon. And that ratio, by the way, the balance between the sugar and the lemon, that's the one to play with in this drink to get it suited to your personal taste. I like it this way, so does my wife. Half an ounce of simple, 1 ounce of lemon juice. You might want more sugar, you might want less sugar, okay? Now I'm gonna add my gin. I do prefer a London Dry. I have a few options here in the bar today, but I'm gonna go with this Gordon's. And I should point out too, yes, this is called the Tom Collins because it originally called for Old Tom Gin, and I'm gonna expand on that in a bit in a moment when we start talking about the history of this drink. But for now, I'm gonna build this the way I typically do. 2 ounces of a London Dry gin go right on in there. Typically, if a drink has fruit juices, you're gonna shake the drink. And if you wanna go that route, it is completely valid. I just don't think it's necessary in this drink. And since we're about to flood this drink with carbonated water, the additional dilution from shaking may not really even be desirable. So let's just get this thing stirred up and cold and combined, right? That's all we're trying to do here. Just combine these ingredients, boop, 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 boop. Maybe once the outside of your glass starts to feel cold and you can see it's a consistent color all the way through, you're done, okay? At this point, we're ready to add seltzer, or sorry, that's a local thing. Apparently in Germany, seltzer means something very specific. And a bunch of parts of the world, this is going to just be carbonated water. That's all I'm looking for here. I use my iDrinkmate to carbonate up some water. This has been chilling in the fridge, maybe not quite long enough, but it's okay. It's what I got for today. When you carbonate your own water, you want to use the coldest water you can get your hands on. Ideally, it should be just above freezing or at freezing. That will be able to grab onto and store in it more carbon dioxide and better fizz. And you can tell how cold it is by how many pumps like that it takes, right? Give it a shake here. Does that matter? I don't know. Some people say it does. And then I'll do it again until I hear it vent. Because I really want it to be fizzy, 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 fizzy. Ideally, our homemade carbonated water, and I use an iDrinkmate because it's way better than I think anything else on the market in that price range. Even above it, honestly. This thing is great. We want this to be better than store-bought. It should be. Store-bought carbonated water tends to be a little too flat. Pop it off. There we go. Good carbonated. Nice bubbles. Bubble, 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 bubble. And I won't even measure this. That's gonna be about 2 ounces right there. And at this point, you know, you've already got your bar spoon out. You could just give it a little scrape up and down to kind of make sure it's all properly incorporated. Throw a straw in there, and that's it. That's it. Garnish it if you want, but we never do it around my house. And let's see how this is. Perfect. Perfect. You can really taste the gin, the juniper, bracing, lemon, combination, just moderated by enough sweetness. Honestly, that is the, I think, perfect ratio because you can just taste every component. And the sugar, it's pleasant. It rounds off the edges of what might otherwise be a little too intense. And the bubbles make it nice. And it's a long drink. It's very enjoyable. It's a very nice, cold drink. It's good. Does the Tom Collins have a very elaborate flavor profile? No. There's not really a lot to say about it. If you've never had one and you want a comparison, it's a bit like alcoholic lemonade. I mean, that is really what we're going for here. And it is, and it hits the mark, and I think it's quite good. Delicious, wonderful, refreshing. I should mention too that I'm using a Gordon's London Dry Gin. I think that a lot of different gins will work. I think Beefeater is great. I think Aviation is great. Plymouth, not technically a London Dry Gin, but close enough anyway. All wonderful. Tanqueray is great. Ford's is great. There are a number of gins that will make, I mean, pretty much any gin. They are all going to work, and the reason they're going to work is because a drink like this is similar to an old-fashioned. There isn't, I don't think, necessarily a specific flavor profile in mind with the cocktail. The cocktail is a framework that is used to be an exemplar of the gin of choice. You know, some people have suggested I should do an old-fashioned Matrix, like some of the other Matrix episodes we've done. This is way off topic, but I won't do it because all old-fashions are correct. You are drinking an old-fashioned to sample that whiskey. There's no right whiskey for an old-fashioned. They are all perfect. It's just a way to take that whiskey and unpack its flavor profile a bit so that you can experience it a little better. Same thing here. This just takes the gin that you have and stretches it out and turns it into a nice long drink that you can enjoy. Whatever gin that is correct, and they're all gonna produce a different result. And you can get all of these gins and bottles that I use on the show at Curiata. If gin is in short supply around you, or you just don't like going to the store, I know I don't, Drink.Curiata could probably have you covered. They don't cover 100% of the continental United States yet, but we're getting close. I think we have 80% of the US covered. Changes all the time. I'm not gonna commit to numbers in a video that will last forever, but check it out. There's a link in the pinned comment below, drink.curiata.com. Pick up some different gins, try a few different ways to make a Tom Collins and see which one you like the best. So I mentioned before this drink gets its name from the Old Tom gin that was originally called for in it. That used to be a subject that was somewhat up for debate, but I think that the combined efforts of Gaz Reagan and David Wondrich have thoroughly solved this one. The reason for the confusion around this is actually something hilariously called the Great Tom Collins Hoax of 1874. And I think hoax is kind of a strong word for what it really is, for what this was. What it really is a repeated gag or practical joke in which, you know, a fella, a sporting type, a sporting guy, I think that was 1874, you'd say sporting life, would approach somebody in a bar that they didn't know and ask him, "Hey man, do you know Tom Collins?" And since the person, Tom Collins, does not exist, this person that you don't know just says, "No, I don't know Tom Collins." And then you would say to them, "Well, he seems to know you. He's over at McGurk's," or any other nearby bar, "and he's telling anyone who will listen about how you embezzled money from your company and you f*** horses in your free time. You married a cousin and sold her off at the circus. You torture kittens for nickels at underground boxing matches and you huff balloon maker's glue for sport. He's just over there at McGurk's saying all of that right now. I just came from there." And then you'd have a laugh at that fellow's expense, take their bar stool as they storm off to go show old Tom Collins what for. But here's the truth. The Tom Collins is a follow-up to a drink called the John Collins, which was named for the head waiter of Limmer's Club in London, whose name was John Collins. The head waiter of a club, in this sense, was a rather important man in this sort of British aristocratic men's society, so there's even a poem about him. Ahem. "My name is John Collins, head waiter at Limmer's, corner of Conduit Street, Hanover Square. My chief occupation is filling up brimmers for all the young gentlemen frequenters there." The John Collins served by its namesake called for Hollands or Genever, sort of gin 1.0. The name Tom Collins caught on when this newfangled Old Tom gin became all the rage and folks started ordering their John Collinses with the new stuff. So they would ask instead for a Tom Collins, which is actually really interesting. I wonder what is the origin of Old Tom. I do know that there's a black cat figure associated with the gin craze of the time. Of course, now we think of Old Tom gin as being this semi-antiquated variety of gin produced by a handful of specialty distillers, but in 1874, it was very much the new kid on the block and all the rage. To support the point that this is how it was, the 1876 edition of the Jerry Thomas Guide calls for Old Tom in a Tom Collins and Hollands in a John Collins. One thing that to my mind remains in question with all of this though is where did the Tom Collins hoax comes from? Based on the history here, I think there's really only two options. Either it was a complete coincidence born of some other place entirely, or it comes about as a result of the cocktail. Possibly the Tom Collins was very new on the scene, and inquiring about whether or not someone knew Tom Collins was a means of testing their hepness, as it was. At present, it's actually impossible for me to say. I don't have the research. I haven't read anything that would indicate the origins of the Tom Collins hoax, one way or the other. And honestly, I'd be pretty suspicious of anything too. I mean, you're dealing with a very subtle chicken or egg scenario from more than 100 years on here, more than like what, 150 years on. I don't know. I would be suspicious of our ability to pinpoint, not necessarily impossible, but suspicious of our ability to pinpoint which came first here. Very good, Tom Collins. Gets better all the time. So in my previous episode on the Tom Collins, I said something wrong. I said that if you go the Old Tom route, you should hold off on the simple syrup. It's wildly incorrect. Don't do that. The drink needs sweetness, generally in roughly equal force to its lemon tartness, regardless of your choice of gin. Personally, no matter what the origins of the drink's namesake is here, I think these drinks are better with a modern, and I use modern, loosely, turn of the century, London Dry, as opposed to the Old Tom of yore. But feel free to experiment with it if you like. Ransom makes a very nice Old Tom, as does Heyman's makes an Old Tom. Both of those should be readily available, and we'll get them into a Curiata link for you as well. I actually happen to be out of both of them. I don't have any. There'll be a link in the pin comment below if you want to pick up a bottle and order it for yourself to try a Tom Collins with an Old Tom gin. Worth experimenting with. But I will say that one nice thing about a Tom Collins, and a drink that's as simplified and basic as a Tom Collins, is that there are a near infinite number of ways you can tinker with it. The very easiest, to me, if I wanted to elevate this drink, is to try some of your more off-the-wall bitters in it, okay? And I have brought out a few right here, right? So I've got Excellent in here, celery bitters, Excellent, any of those kind of green bitters, right? Grapefruit, this is a staple when I want to make a variation on an Old Tom. A little grapefruit bitters can be phenomenal here. Certainly Angostura, yeah, why not? Peychaud's, why not? Both of those are going to be great, but I do think that staying in that citrus space makes a lot of sense. And to that end, I would say Ella bitters from, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, honestly. It might be Ella Makuli. Bitters from Bitterman's, excellent choice to elevate an Old Tom. Great place for shrubs and things like that. This is Orchard Street Celery Shrub. Not really a bitter, more of a drinkable vinegar. I would actually say this would be a fun experiment. I'm not going to do it today, but Chocolatal Mollet bitters from Bitterman's, and I put a lot of French on that. I don't know why. I apologize. Chocolate Mole bitters from from Bitterman's. Maybe a bit weird, but then again, it might work really well. I don't know. I do know that this can be excellent. A couple dashes of grapefruit bitters in your Tom Collins, right? Boom, just like that. 2 dashes, whatever. Give it a quick stir. Woo! I mean, that's transformative. That takes the whole drink in another direction. Just 2 dashes. It's much more bracing, much tartar, and new flavors emerge. There's like cherry-ish notes as well as just like that really bitter grapefruit thing that happens there. That's very nice. It's a very cool way to go. A couple dashes of various bitters have a huge outcome on this drink. You could try alternative citrus in this. You could try other citruses, Lime works well, maybe calls for a little bit more sweetness because limes are pretty tart. Grapefruit works exceptionally well. You could try orange. Orange would call for less sweetness. Oranges have a lot of sugar in them. You could swap your lemon and sugar combination entirely, at least in part, with oleosaccharum, and harken back to the gin punch roots of this drink. If you want to cast your gaze ahead and into future gastro mixology stuff, you could take your lemon juice and clarify it with agar-agar, create a Collins that is devoid of cloudiness or pulp. Those are certainly options. You can also certainly substitute the base spirit in these, though I do think that kind of moves us a bit further away from a variation on a Tom Collins into the realm of a different drink entirely. There is a kind of late 1800s formula for improving near any drink that calls for a dash or rinse of absinthe and either supplementing the simple or replacing it entirely with liqueur, such as a maraschino or a curacao. And honestly, I've never tested that on a Collins before. I have zero reason, though, to expect it to be anything other than wonderful. So let's give that a shot and mix up an improved Tom Collins right after this. If you're watching how to drink, you might find yourself needing some bar tools, and I know there's at least a few options out there, but I think you should know about Barfly, who, by the way, sponsored this episode, so thank you, Barfly. Barfly manufactures a lot of the tools, hardware, and gadgets used in bars all over the world. They build to professional grades and standards, but they also keep their costs low because, realistically, when you're shaking hundreds of cocktails a week, stuff will break or become lost, and you'll need to replace things, and Barfly won't rake you over the coals to do it. I first encountered Barfly at BarCon in Brooklyn a few years back. They had this little ice knife thing that they were showing off, and I'd never seen anything like it, and I loved it. And when I got my hands on it and had a chance to play with it, I couldn't believe how it improved my ability to work ice like 10,000%. It was just like suddenly having power tools. I could cut ice diamonds pretty quick. And it's got a really pokey poke. It's very rigid. You can use it as a pick as well. Kind of does everything in one. I was thrilled with it. Between that and a classic bar spoon, a julep strainer, and a beautiful mixing glass, you have everything you need to enjoy wonderful stirred cocktails like this old-fashioned I'm enjoying here. Barfly products are available from a number of retailers, including Amazon, so I'll collect this set together into some affiliate links for the pinned comment below. But next time you need bar tools, think about Barfly. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna make what I'm gonna call today an improved Tom Collins. I've never made this before. I've never experimented with it, but it's a formula that I know to work, and I have no reason to suspect it won't work here. And if it doesn't, that'll be informative too. If it doesn't, you know, you take this and use this information well. Don't need to shake these, but you know, just to mix it up and show you a different way to do this, I'm gonna shake this one. I will start in my shaker. I'm gonna start with a 1/4 ounce of simple syrup here. By the way, some people are gonna ask me about adding an egg or egg white to this. That actually kind of puts this drink out of a Collins territory and into a fizz territory. So if that's of interest to you. Then I'm gonna add an ounce of lemon juice, which I should have in this half a lemon right here. And I certainly do. And now we're kind of into the wild blue yonder. We get to make it up as we go along. How about 1/2 ounce of maraschino? I think that's an excellent way to go. And I'm looking up, I'm seeing Italicus right there. That would be a really fun way to go too. But this is more traditional to the 1800s. That Italicus though, a bergamot, Tom Collins? Ooh, man, I didn't bring enough glassware to try this more than one way. I'm gonna do a 1/2 ounce of Luxardo Maraschino here. I love maraschino in a cocktail. It is something I consider to be a bar essential. This brings such a roundness and sweetness to any drink, and it can be used as a replacement for your sweet component in just about any cocktail. Not maybe a 1-to-1 replacement. Maybe you still want to keep some straight sugar, but if you're going to add maraschino to a drink, take some of the sugar out because it is a sweet liqueur, and that's the way it would have been done in the 1870s. That's how you get, by the way, and I'm getting way off topic, but that's how you get to a Sazerac. Sazerac is an old-fashioned that is improved by the addition of absinthe and maraschino. And speaking of that, let's add a little bit of absinthe, right? And I should say too that maybe you could go with less maraschino, right? Like a 1/2 ounce, maybe I could have done a 1/4 ounce, might be able to get away with less. I am okay though, on my first go at this with overshooting it a bit and dialing it in later. Let's add a dash or maybe 2 of absinthe. This drink lengthened with club soda, seltzer. Yeah, I'm gonna do 2 dashes of absinthe. Whenever I do a dasher of absinthe, people ask me, what absinthe are you using? At this quantity, it really barely matters. Barely matters. I would suggest that you use a Pernod Absinthe Original. I don't even know if they make the pastis anymore, but they do make they make real absinthe. They make the stock standard absinthe of that is absolutely 100% authentic. That's what I would typically, if that's not what's in there, it might not be, but I don't care. Sometimes with these improved late 1800 drinks, they would add some curacao. I don't think we need it. We've already got the lemon in there. I think if we add the curacao, we're just going to kind of mute that and kind of rob it of some tartness in favor of like other kinds of notes that we're already getting from the maraschino. Should we do the French Traders gin? I mean, I have no use for this otherwise. Why not? Let's try this. What the heck? Let's do 2 ounces of French Traders gin. Why not? Get real ancient on this, because I think this is kind of a throwback old Tom. It has a lot of juniper and pine notes on the nose, so I think this should be good. This should be modern enough to be comfortable. Let's put some ice in our shaker and shake it up. Take your Collins glass, a proper Collins spear, drop that right in there, strain that away. Top this up with some carbonated water, get your straw in there. Maybe work it up and down just a little bit to help it incorporate. This ice cube is just a little bit fat for this glass, but that's all right. But here it is. Let's try this. I've never had this before. I just made this up on the fly. This is a improved Tom Collins made with what I think might be even an old Tom gin. So let's find out. Oh, what a lovely drink. What this drink has that the regular Tom Collins doesn't have, that you get from that kind of 1870s improvement ratio of combining some maraschino and some absinthe in there, it's like a cheat code for a really long evolution. It takes this classic drink and you still get that lemon and sweetness, but almost immediately it starts getting overtaken by the round, warm, and nutty notes of the maraschino, and that gives way to the licorice notes of the absinthe, but it takes a long time to get there. I mean, even still, as I speak and air is moving over my taste buds and my mouth, which is coated with it, I'm getting new flavors off of it, right? There's a really long evolution in this drink that is missing. Oh, I wouldn't say it's missing, but just isn't present in a more standard London Dry. Do I think that this gin makes much of a difference? No, not really. It really has a very different roundness of flavor. It's less tart, less acidic, less bracing, less of a lemonade, but still very much in that space. It's just like very sophisticated. It brings out this completely different note in its flavor profile and evolution that is not in the easiest thing to put a placement. You know, it's tough to stick your finger on that, but it's very welcome. And so that would be one approach to plussing, to taking a Tom Collins and elevating it, right? You know, we take our simple and we take part of the simple away and replace it with a liqueur. And we add an additional modifier. It could be one of these bitters. It could be an absinthe. And then we change our gin for something slightly more exotic. I wouldn't go too weird. Something a little bit askew or not. I think this would work really well with any of these drier gins as well. Possibly even better. That might be the one thing. I think that maybe I would have preferred this even more with a sharper, drier gin. In the face of that maraschino, you know, the maraschino does that job. It doesn't need any help. This is wonderful though. This is a very complex evolution, nutty, round, sweet, no hard edges, very comfortable Collins. It's a very sophisticated Collins. This is a very mature Collins. This Collins just wants to get cozy with you. It's just a nice Collins. This Collins a little younger, a little brasher. Oh, I forgot to put the grapefruit in there. That's great though with the grapefruit. I like that a lot. Worlds apart. Very subtle difference in ingredients when you really get down to it, honestly. And I think that will inform you when you're approaching the Collins. Use it as a framework to experiment. I would love to know what you do with it. And hopefully this episode is useful to you. I'm kind of revisiting a lot of the very first and earliest of episodes on how to drink, readdressing sort of the foundational pillars of mixology, Collins being one of them. And hopefully you enjoy that. And if you want to see more of that, let me know. We're going to go back to a lot of the first episodes of the show and approach them with more history, with more of what I'm doing on the show these days. You know, 5-6 years ago when I started this, it was a very different thing. I didn't know what it should be yet, and now I feel like I've kind of figured it out a little bit more. I'll see you guys soon with another episode of How to Drink. Until then, you can find me on Twitter at How to Drink. You can find me on Instagram at How to Drink. You can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/howtodrink, where the parts of this episode that didn't quite make the cut will wind up. And if you want to hang out with me live in real time while I'm here in the bar experimenting or at my computer playing games or running and playing and tabletop role-playing games, you'll find me at twitch.tv/GregFromHTD. Until then, I just explained I've been doing this show for a really long time, and if you're new, there's probably some episodes you haven't seen, so why don't you check out one of these other 4 episodes that are appearing on your screen right now. Check them out. Look at them. They're beautiful. Well, I don't know if they're beautiful, but they're all right. They're all right. We did okay with that. That's not bad stuff. Hey, that's good content there. Give it a little love. And I'll see you soon with another episode of How to Drink. Okay. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.